There is a path that leads away from the comfortable illusions that bind most lives, a path toward truth, wisdom, and the clear seeing that penetrates all veils. But this path demands a payment that few are willing to make, the gradual release of everything that once provided comfort, including the warm embrace of shared ignorance with those around you. I have walked this path to its furthest reaches, and I can tell you its most challenging truth. The deeper you see, the more alone you become, not because you choose isolation, but because authentic understanding creates a chasm between you and a world that prefers its comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. This is not the loneliness of the rejected or the abandoned. It is the solitude of the awakened, standing in a clarity so bright that most cannot bear to look directly at it. It is the isolation of one who has seen beyond the theater of daily life and can no longer pretend that the performance is reality. Today, I speak of this inevitable separation, why it occurs, why it is necessary, and how to transform the pain of loneliness into the power of solitude. For those who seek genuine understanding, isolation is not a punishment, but a prerequisite, not a failure, but the price of seeing what others cannot yet perceive. Enlightenment begins the moment you stop accepting answers that satisfy everyone else and start asking questions that disturb your own peace. This questioning creates the first crack in the shell of conventional belonging. You can no longer participate wholeheartedly in conversations built on assumptions. You have begun to question. The process is gradual, but inexorable. You find yourself unable to engage with the casual complaints, mindless entertainment, and surface-level concerns that once formed the foundation of your social connections. Not because you judge others for these things, but because your attention has been captured by deeper currents that make small talk feel like trying to discuss oceans while standing in puddles. This is not arrogance. It is the natural result of expanded awareness. When you begin to see the patterns that govern human behavior, the unconscious drives that motivate most actions, and the illusions that create most suffering, you can no longer pretend these patterns are invisible. You become like someone who has learned to read, trying to have meaningful conversations with those who insist that books contain only meaningless marks. The spiritual awakening process is particularly ruthless in this regard. As false beliefs fall away, beliefs about success, relationships, identity, purpose, you discover that most of your connections were built on shared investment in these illusions. When you no longer need the validation these beliefs provided, when you no longer fear the consequences they threatened, you find yourself speaking a language that fewer and fewer people understand. Friends who once felt close begin to seem distant, not because of any conflict, but because the common ground of mutual confusion has disappeared. Family members who once provided comfort through shared assumptions now offer advice that feels irrelevant to your actual situation. Colleagues who once seemed insightful now appear to be reading from scripts they have never questioned. This separation is not something you impose. It emerges naturally as your capacity for authentic expression increases while your tolerance for performance decreases. You find yourself less willing to pretend enthusiasm for things that bore you, less able to maintain relationships based on mutual enabling of unconscious patterns, less capable of participating in collective delusions, even when such participation would be socially advantageous. The world begins to feel like a stage filled with actors who have forgotten they are performing, while you stand in the wings unable to join the play and unwilling to disrupt it. True seeing creates a particular form of loneliness, not the loneliness of being unloved, but the loneliness of loving what others cannot yet see. You begin to perceive the beauty, interconnection, and profound meaning that underlies apparent chaos, but you discover that most people are not ready to receive these perceptions. This creates what spiritual traditions call the loneliness of the soul, a homesickness for a realm of understanding that feels more real than the physical world around you. You recognize truth when you encounter it, but truth is rare in a world built on convenient fictions. You hunger for conversations that acknowledge the depth and mystery of existence, but find yourself surrounded by discussions of weather, politics, and personal drama. The weight of seeing clearly becomes a burden you must carry alone. When you perceive the unconscious patterns driving someone's behavior, do you speak and risk being seen as judgmental? or remain silent and feel complicit in their self-deception? When you recognize the futility of pursuits that everyone around you considers essential, do you share your perspective and seem arrogant, or participate and feel like a fraud? This dilemma has no perfect solution. Speaking truth often creates defensiveness and rejection. Remaining silent creates the exhaustion of constant performance. Both choices reinforce the isolation, either through others' rejection of your insights or through your own withdrawal from authentic expression. The loneliness deepens when you realize that your desire to share what you have learned is often motivated more by your need for connection than by others' readiness to receive. You discover that wisdom cannot be transmitted through explanation, but only recognized by those who have developed the capacity to see it for themselves. Your attempts to help others often become exercises in futility that leave both parties frustrated. Even more isolating is the recognition that much of what passes for spiritual community is built on shared spiritual materialism. The pursuit of enlightenment as another form of achievement, another way to feel special or superior. You find yourself unable to participate in spiritual competition, unable to claim attainments that would provide social connection within communities that understand themselves to be awakened. The path toward genuine understanding is ultimately solitary, not because it must be traveled alone, but because each person must walk their own version of it. You cannot carry others across the territory of awakening, and others cannot carry you. At best, you can offer companionship to fellow travelers, but even this becomes rare, as fewer and fewer people choose the discomfort of growth over the familiarity of stagnation. One of Enlightenment's most painful teachings is the recognition that many connections you valued were built on mutual unconsciousness rather than genuine intimacy. As awareness increases, you begin to see how much of your social life was based on shared complaints, mutual validation of limiting beliefs, and collective avoidance of deeper truths. Relationships that once felt meaningful reveal themselves to have been transactions. You provided what others needed to maintain their illusions, and they provided the same service for you. When you stop needing these illusions maintained, you discover that many people have little interest in connecting with who you actually are beneath the roles and personas that served these unconscious agreements. This realization creates a form of grief that cannot be shared with those you are grieving. How do you mourn connections that were never as real as you believed them to be? How do you explain to someone that your relationship with them was largely a mutual performance that you can no longer maintain? The very people you would normally turn to for comfort are often the ones from whom you must now create distance. The process is complicated by genuine love for people whose unconscious patterns you can now see clearly. You love them, but you can no longer enable their self-deception. You care about their well-being, but you recognize that your previous forms of caring may have been harmful. You want to maintain connection, but not at the cost of returning to unconsciousness yourself. Some relationships survive this transition by evolving to a deeper level of authenticity, but many do not, because they were never designed to accommodate genuine truth-telling, real growth, or the kind of honesty that dissolves comfortable illusions. The friends who accepted your performed version may reject your authentic version. The family members who loved your role may struggle to connect with your reality. This creates what appears to be a cruel paradox. The more you embody love, real love that wishes for others' highest growth, rather than their comfortable stagnation, the more isolated you may become from people who prefer love that enables, rather than challenges, that soothes rather than awakens, that confirms rather than illuminates. You find yourself in the position of loving people more than they love themselves, seeing their potential more clearly than they do, and wanting their freedom more than they want it. This love cannot be expressed through the conventional channels of agreement, validation, and mutual comfort. It must find expression through presence, truth, and the kind of compassionate detachment that allows others their own timing for awakening. The alchemy of awakening eventually transforms the pain of loneliness into the peace of solitude. But this transformation cannot be rushed or forced. It emerges naturally when you stop trying to bridge the gap between your understanding and others' readiness, and instead learn to find completeness in your own direct experience of truth. Solitude differs from loneliness in that it contains no sense of lack, no desperate need for external validation or connection to feel whole. In true solitude, you discover that the connection you were seeking with others was actually a reflection of the connection you needed to establish with your own deeper nature. The conversation you wanted to have with an understanding friend was actually the conversation you needed to have with your own inner wisdom. This shift happens when you realize that the isolation imposed by awakening is not a punishment, but a gift, a forced retreat from external distractions that allows you to discover the fullness that was always available within. The very separation that once felt like abandonment reveals itself to be protection, ensuring that your understanding remains pure, rather than being diluted by premature sharing or distorted by others' projections. In this deeper solitude, you begin to experience what mystics call the presence of the divine, or what psychologists might term self-actualization, a sense of being accompanied by something larger than your individual personality, connected to a wisdom that transcends personal understanding. The loneliness dissolves, not because you find external companions, but because you discover that you were never actually alone. This transformation also brings the recognition that genuine connection, when it does occur, is far more precious and meaningful than the casual associations that once filled your social calendar. You develop what might be called quality over quantity in relationships. Fewer connections, but ones based on authentic recognition rather than mutual need. Shared growth rather than shared stagnation. You learn to distinguish between people who are ready for genuine encounter and those who are still committed to maintaining their familiar patterns. This discernment allows you to offer appropriate levels of authenticity, sharing deeply with those who can receive it, maintaining kind but surface-level interaction with those who cannot, and withdrawing completely from situations that would require you to compromise your integrity. Perhaps most importantly, you develop the ability to be alone without being lonely, to enjoy your own company without needing constant external stimulation or validation. This capacity for self-companionship becomes the foundation for all healthy relationships, because you can now connect with others from choice rather than need, from overflow rather than deficit. What initially appears as the price of enlightenment eventually reveals itself as one of its greatest gifts. The isolation that once felt like punishment becomes the very condition that allows the deepest transformations to occur. In the silence left by departed distractions, you discover capacities and insights that could never have emerged in the noise of unconscious social engagement. Sacred isolation provides the space necessary for integration. The insights, experiences, and understanding that emerge through awakening need time and stillness to be properly absorbed into your being, like a seed that must remain underground before sprouting. Wisdom requires periods of hiddenness before it can manifest as authentic transformation. In this protected space, you develop what might be called inner authority, the capacity to trust your own direct experience over external opinions, to rely on your own inner guidance rather than seeking constant validation from others. This authority is not arrogance, but the natural result of learning to distinguish between the voice of authentic wisdom and the noise of conditioning, projection, and social expectation. The isolation also serves as a purification process, burning away the aspects of personality that were designed to please others rather than express truth. Without the constant feedback loop of social approval and disapproval, you begin to discover who you are when no one is watching, what you truly value when no one is judging, what brings you joy when no one is measuring your response. Perhaps most significantly, the isolation teaches you to become the kind of person you are seeking in others. Instead of looking for someone who understands your spiritual insights, you develop the capacity to hold space for your own depth. Instead of seeking someone who can see your authentic self, you learn to see yourself clearly. Instead of wanting someone who can love all of you, you cultivate self-compassion that embraces every aspect of your being. This inner development eventually attracts different kinds of relationships, connections based on authenticity rather than need, mutual recognition rather than mutual enabling, shared truth rather than shared illusions. But these relationships emerge naturally from your completeness rather than from your loneliness, as expressions of joy rather than attempts to fill a void. The greatest gift of sacred isolation may be the development of what traditions call compassionate detachment, the ability to love deeply while holding lightly, to care intensely while accepting completely. to serve wholeheartedly while expecting nothing in return. This quality allows you to re-engage with the world from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, offering genuine help rather than seeking mutual satisfaction of unconscious needs. You discover that enlightenment does not ultimately separate you from humanity. It reveals your deepest connection to it. But this connection is not based on shared unconsciousness or mutual enablement. It is based on the recognition that everyone is struggling with the same fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and authentic living, even when their struggles take forms you can no longer relate to personally. The path I walked required me to accept the complete misunderstanding of those I served, the rejection of those I protected, and the isolation that comes from choosing duty over popularity, truth over comfort, long-term benefit over short-term approval. In that isolation, I discovered that the companionship I had been seeking in others was always available in the depths of my own being. I learned that isolation is enlightenment's gift to those strong enough to receive it. Not because awakening requires loneliness, but because it requires the kind of deep inner work that can only happen when external distractions are removed. The silence that initially feels empty eventually reveals itself to be full. The aloneness that initially feels painful eventually becomes the foundation of unshakable peace. Your modern world offers countless ways to avoid the necessary solitude of genuine growth. Social media provides constant connection that prevents deep self-encounter. Entertainment offers perpetual distraction from the inner work that requires stillness. Consumer culture promises that external acquisition can fill the void that can only be filled through internal development. But the ancient wisdom remains true. Those who would find themselves must first be willing to lose themselves, and losing yourself requires losing your attachment to how others see you, need you, or define you. The caterpillar must dissolve completely before it can become the butterfly. The seed must be buried in darkness before it can grow toward light. The isolation of enlightenment is temporary, but its gifts are permanent. You learn to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between abandonment and independence, between being unloved and being self-contained. You develop the capacity to be alone without being lonely, to stand apart without standing against, to maintain your truth without needing others to validate it. When connection does come, and it will, it comes from a place of wholeness rather than need. Recognition rather than projection, authentic meeting rather than mutual unconsciousness. The relationships that emerge from this foundation are rare but real, based on who you actually are rather than who others need you to be. Remember that the very isolation you fear may be the protection you need. The very solitude you resist may be the gift you require. The very loneliness that feels like punishment may be the purification that prepares you for deeper service. Not everyone who seems connected is actually intimate. Not everyone who appears supported is truly seen. Not everyone who looks popular is genuinely loved. The price of enlightenment is indeed isolation, but what you receive in return makes the payment seem small. You gain yourself, your truth, your authentic power, and the unshakable peace that comes from knowing who you are, regardless of who else does or doesn't understand. In the end, you discover that you were never seeking the understanding of others. You were seeking your own understanding, reflected in their recognition. When you find that understanding within yourself, the need for external validation dissolves, and what remains is a love so complete it can embrace even those who cannot love you back. A peace so profound it remains undisturbed even in complete solitude. The path of awakening leads home to yourself. Walk it alone if necessary. Walk it gladly when possible, but walk it completely regardless of company. In that walking, you will find not the isolation you feared, but the communion with truth that makes all other connections secondary. The price has been paid, the gift has been received. What remains is the joy of being authentically, completely, unapologetically yourself in solitude or in company, in understanding or in misunderstanding, in connection or in sacred aloneness. This is enough. You are enough. The journey home to yourself is complete.